The cry in the wilderness. Some cries don't echo through the trees, they tear straight into your soul. The Bitterroot Mountains in western Montana were silent beneath the late October sky. Crisp wind whispered through the pines, carrying the earthy scent of moss and distant snow. High above the town of Darby, where asphalt gave way to dirt trails and trails gave way to silence, the forest breathed its cold, patient rhythm. Michael Harrow exhaled slowly, his breath fogging in the icy morning air. The sun hadn't yet risen fully, and shadows still clung to the forest floor. In his calloused hands, he cradled a splitting maul, its wooden handle worn smooth from years of use. The morning's task was simple: firewood. Same as it had been for the last 3 winters. Same as it had been since the world had gone quiet for him. He stood alone behind his cabin, a weather-beaten structure nestled at the edge of a narrow clearing. The cabin, built decades earlier by his father, was a fortress of solitude now: solid pine walls, a stone chimney coughing smoke into the chilled sky, and a rusting wind vane that creaked with each breeze. Michael didn't mind the isolation. At 42, with a grizzled beard streaked with silver and tired blue eyes set beneath a furrowed brow, he found solace in silence. Only Scout, his border collie mix, offered him company, loyal, sharp-eyed, and quiet, just like his owner. Scout padded around the pile of logs, sniffing at the base of a tree, ears twitching. The dog paused suddenly, head tilting, and let out a soft, uncertain whine. Michael glanced over. "What is it, boy?" Scout took a few steps toward the woods, nose to the air. Then, it came, the sound. A cry. Faint, high-pitched. Not quite a meow. Not a bird call. It came again. Short, stuttering, desperate. Michael lowered the maul and straightened slowly, his body stiff from the morning chill. That sound, it wasn't wind. It wasn't nothing. It was a plea. A cry that didn't belong in the forest. Scout moved first, nosing forward through the brush with hesitant steps. Michael followed, boots crunching dry leaves. The path narrowed as they descended a rocky slope littered with pine needles and frost. The cry came again, closer now. Sharper. Sadder. Then he saw it. A small bundle of tawny fur, no bigger than a loaf of bread, nestled against something much larger and still. A bobcat kitten, barely 6 weeks old, curled tightly against the side of its lifeless mother. Her eyes were half open, glazed. A dark stain marred her spotted coat, dried blood clinging to her ribs. A bullet wound. Michael froze, breath caught in his throat. The kitten let out a broken mewl, nudging at its mother's side, trying in vain to wake her. Scout whimpered. Michael took a slow step forward, then another, his voice soft as the morning wind. "Hey there, little one, what happened to you out here?" The kitten lifted its tiny head, blue eyes dull with confusion, and mewed again, this time, straight at him. The forest no longer felt silent. It felt like it was holding its breath. Michael knelt slowly, knees pressing into the cold, pine-needled earth. He stayed a few feet away, careful not to startle the small creature clinging to what remained of warmth beside its mother. The kitten's thin frame trembled, and each breath it took looked like an effort. Its fur, normally thick and plush for a bobcat, was matted, tangled with debris and dried blood from the adult's side. The mother lay still, her powerful limbs stretched unnaturally. She had been a large bobcat, nearly 30 pounds, with the same golden-brown fur and black-tipped ears. But her body was slack now, her muscles no longer coiled with life. A single bullet wound marked her left side, just behind the shoulder. A hunter. Maybe someone who didn't see the kitten. Or worse, didn't care. Michael's stomach turned. Scout stayed back, sitting low, sensing the fragility of the moment. His brown eyes watched the kitten with alert concern, but he didn't bark or move. Somehow, he understood. The kitten mewed again, weaker now, its small body slumping slightly. Michael exhaled and reached into the flannel lining of his heavy coat. He pulled out the extra scarf he always carried and, without sudden movements, unfolded it in his lap. "You're not gonna make it out here," he murmured, mostly to himself. "Not like this." Still kneeling, he reached out the scarf. The kitten bared tiny teeth and hissed, a pitiful sound that was more exhaustion than threat. Its eyes were half closed, ears trembling. Michael stopped short and waited, his hand resting still on the ground. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you," he said gently, voice low and calm. "I've seen what hurt looks like." After a long moment, the kitten's breathing slowed. Its tiny body leaned heavily against its mother's side once more. Michael moved forward inch by inch, wrapping the scarf gently around the baby bobcat. Its frame felt weightless in his arms, maybe 3 pounds at most. It didn't fight. It didn't even lift its head. Michael held it close to his chest, rising carefully. He glanced down at the mother's body. She looked like she'd died protecting her cub, facing outward, as though ready to fight something off. The blood trail was thin. She hadn't made it far after being shot. And she had used her final strength to bring her kitten here, off the trail, away from danger. He whispered softly, "You did your job, Mama. I'll take it from here." With Scout trotting silently at his side, Michael turned back toward the cabin. The kitten stirred in his arms, releasing a faint, half-hearted cry before curling deeper into the flannel. The wind picked up behind them, rustling the trees as if whispering a prayer. By the time he reached his cabin door, the baby bobcat was asleep against his chest, breathing shallowly, but breathing. Michael opened the door and stepped into the warmth of his wood-heated home, not knowing that one small life had just changed everything. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting golden shadows across the log cabin walls. Michael eased the kitten down into a shallow wooden crate he'd lined with an old wool blanket. The box had once stored tools, now it cradled something far more fragile. The kitten curled immediately into a tight ball, the flannel still wrapped loosely around her like a cocoon. Scout sat beside the crate, ears forward, nose twitching. He let out a quiet huff, then lay down, his head resting between his paws, eyes fixed on the tiny bundle. Michael crouched beside them, studying the kitten's face. "You're a fighter, huh?" he murmured. He stood, moving to the kitchen area, where he rummaged through a drawer for an old medicine dropper. The cabin wasn't stocked for animal rescue, it was stocked for survival. But Michael had lived a life that required being ready for anything, and after years as a wildlife ranger, some instincts never left. He poured a bit of warm water into a mug, then stirred in a small spoonful of powdered goat milk, a leftover from a neighbor who used to raise orphaned fawns. After testing the temperature against his wrist, he knelt again by the crate. The kitten opened her eyes at the faint scent, nose twitching. Michael held the dropper near her lips and gently nudged it. She hissed, barely audible, then licked at the tip. "That's it," he whispered. "Take your time." Slowly, sip by sip, the kitten drank. Her frail body shivered with each swallow, but her eyes stayed fixed on him, blinking slowly between mouthfuls. She was starving, cold, and lost, but she wasn't giving up. Michael sat on the floor beside her for a long while, refilling the dropper when needed. Scout never moved, keeping watch like a quiet sentinel. When the kitten finally dozed off again, belly warm and round, Michael leaned back and let out a slow breath. He rubbed his hands over his face, fatigue from the emotional morning settling in like heavy snow. He hadn't planned this. He'd meant to gather firewood, fix the broken porch rail, maybe take Scout on a walk down to the creek. But now, lying inches away from his fireplace, was a baby bobcat with nowhere else to go, and somehow, she had landed in his care. He stood and walked over to the hearth, tossing in another log. Flames licked upward, the warmth spreading fast. Outside, the sky had gone gray, and the wind howled low through the pines, a storm moving in. Michael glanced at the telephone on the wall. An old landline, the kind that only worked when the weather behaved. He picked it up. No dial tone. He tried again. Nothing. He stared at the receiver a moment, then set it down with a sigh. The roads into Derby would already be icing over. Snow was coming early this year. No calls. No vet. No ranger station. Not tonight. He looked back at the crate. The kitten had curled deeper into the blanket, her breaths now slower, steadier. There would be no turning her in tomorrow. She wouldn't survive another transfer, not yet. He walked over and sat in the old rocking chair beside the fire, eyes heavy, Scout curled at his feet. Well, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Looks like you're staying a while. And outside, the first snowflake of the season drifted down, silent, steady, and soft. The storm rolled in with a quiet fury. By morning, the world outside Michael's cabin had vanished beneath 6 inches of fresh snow. The mountains wore their winter coats early this year, peaks blanketed in white, trees bowing under the weight. The path into town, a narrow dirt road winding through the forest, had disappeared entirely. Michael stood at the window, one hand curled around a steaming mug of coffee, the other resting on the back of Scout's neck. His dog leaned into the touch, both of them staring out into the stillness. No one's coming today, Michael muttered. Behind them, a tiny rustle broke the silence. The crate near the fire shifted, and a small, fluffy head peeked over the edge. The kitten blinked groggily, ears twitching, eyes adjusting to the dim morning light. Michael turned, setting his mug down. Well, look who's up. He walked over slowly and crouched beside the box. The kitten didn't hiss this time. She simply stared, wide-eyed and quiet. Her blue eyes were clearer now, the fog of fear slowly lifting. He reached in gently and lifted her out, cradling her in one hand. She was so light, barely a breath of weight, and yet warm now, a sign her body was no longer losing the battle to the cold. Scout approached, tail wagging slowly. The kitten sniffed the air, alert but calm, then tucked her head under Michael's palm. That moment, it hit him harder than he expected. 3 winters ago, this cabin had felt just as quiet. Just as cold. He and Lily had stood by the fireplace then, hanging ornaments on a scraggly pine tree they dragged in from the woods. She was 6. Freckles on her nose. Laugh like summer wind. The fever came fast. The ambulance took too long. And just like that, the cabin went still. Michael hadn't decorated a tree since. Hadn't let anyone in. Not really. People offered casseroles, prayers, time. But grief isn't cured with kindness. It just gets quieter. Until something cries in the woods, and your heart forgets how broken it is. He carried the kitten to the sofa, laying her on a folded towel near the fire. She curled up instantly, her small body shivering slightly. He covered her with the edge of the towel and sat beside her, stroking her back with the gentlest touch. You need a name, he said softly. The kitten's ear twitched. He looked at the frost-laced window, where snow dusted the sill in quiet flakes. Willow, he decided. It suited her. Wild. Resilient. Soft but strong. Like the tree that bends but never breaks. Over the next 2 days, the storm kept them locked in. The power flickered, but the fire stayed steady. Michael cooked stew from canned venison, made hot rice and warmed milk for Willow every few hours. Each time, she ate a little more, climbed a little higher, purred a little louder. Scout remained close by, ever patient, ever gentle. When Willow took her first wobbly steps across the cabin floor, Scout walked beside her like a silent guardian. And Michael watched it all, quiet, unsure, but somehow, lighter. At night, when the wind howled outside and the sky dumped more snow, he found himself listening for Willow's tiny breaths, waiting for her soft muse. He didn't say it aloud. Not yet. But deep down, he knew, this wasn't just a rescue. It was a return. Not for the kitten. For him. The snow finally began to melt on the 5th day. Patches of brown earth reappeared beneath the dripping trees, and the dirt road leading down into Derby was once again visible through the thinning frost. Michael stood on the porch, shovel in hand, clearing the last of the ice from his steps. The air was still sharp, but the storm had passed. Inside the cabin, Willow dozed on a worn wool sweater draped over the sofa. Her breathing was steady now, her movements stronger. She even chased her own tail earlier that morning, a clumsy, ungraceful attempt that had made Michael laugh out loud for the first time in months. Word always traveled fast in a small town. And when you've been gone from it long enough, people notice. Sophie Lambert noticed first. The schoolteacher had known Michael since they were kids, back when they raced bikes down Main Street and shared cinnamon rolls at her aunt's bakery. Years later, they'd nearly built something more. But Lily's illness had taken the best of him, and Michael had shut everyone out, including Sophie. She arrived that afternoon, boots crunching up the gravel path, scarf wrapped tight around her neck. Michael saw her through the window and hesitated. Then he opened the door. "You still shovel like a madman," she said, stepping up. "You still show up uninvited," he replied, but his voice softened. Her gaze wandered inside. That's when she saw the small form curled on the sofa. "Is that a bobcat?" Michael nodded. "Found her next to her mother. Dead. Hunter, probably." Sophie stepped closer to the doorway, concern knitting her brow. "Michael, you can't keep her. That's illegal. It's a wild animal." "I know," he said simply. "I'm not keeping her. Just keeping her alive." Sophie's eyes lingered on Willow, who blinked sleepily and let out a soft chirp. "She doesn't look so wild anymore." "Not yet. But she will be." A pause. "Have you called anyone?" Storm knocked the phone out. Roads were closed. "I'll call Fish and Wildlife tomorrow." Sophie studied him, then the animal, then back again. "Be careful," she said quietly. "People in town, they talk." Michael nodded. "Let 'em talk." As she walked away, Michael glanced back at Willow. She stretched lazily, then curled deeper into the blanket. Let them talk. He knew what he was doing. At least, he hoped he did. 2 days after Sophie's visit, a white state truck pulled up to the edge of Michael's property. The rumble of the tires on gravel echoed across the trees as Scout barked sharply from the porch. Michael stepped outside, his coat unzipped despite the chill. He knew that logo stenciled on the door, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks. He also knew the man climbing out of the cab. "Michael Harrow," the ranger called, his voice even but firm. "We got a report. Thought I'd come see for myself." Grant Tully. Mid-50s, stocky, with a permanent squint like he never quite trusted the daylight. Michael had worked alongside him once, years ago, before life turned inside out. Michael nodded once. "Morning, Grant." Tully glanced at Scout, then up at the cabin. "You've got a bobcat in there?" "I do." "You planning to keep it as a pet?" "No." Tully arched a brow. "Mind if I take a look?" Michael stepped aside. "Be my guest." Inside, Willow lay curled near the fire, blinking slowly at the sound of footsteps. She didn't run, but she didn't approach either. Tully crouched, examining her from a safe distance. "She's young," he said. "Real young. Should have never survived a storm like that." "She wouldn't have." Tully stood and turned to Michael. "You know the law. You're not licensed for wildlife rehab. You're not authorized to house protected species, even temporarily. I'm not asking to keep her, Michael replied. Just didn't want her to die in the snow while I waited for the phone to come back. Tully studied him a long moment. You're not the first person to mean well and end up making things worse. These animals don't stay kittens. One day she gets startled, lashes out, and then what? Michael folded his arms. She's not staying. I just need time. A few more weeks, she'll be strong enough to go. You'll never see her again. Tully didn't speak for a moment. Then, with a sigh, he pulled a folded document from his coat. You've got 30 days, he said, handing it over. After that, she's either in our care, or gone. No exceptions. Michael took the paper, eyes steady. Fair enough. As the truck disappeared down the hill, Willow stretched by the fire, her paws flexing softly against the blanket. 30 days. It was more time than Michael expected. But not nearly enough. The cabin door hung open. Snowflakes drifted lazily inside, melting on the warm wood floor. The fire in the hearth had burned low, casting flickering shadows that danced against the walls. Michael stood in the doorway, heart pounding, eyes sweeping the room once more. Willow was gone. The crate was empty. The sweater she slept on lay undisturbed except for a few scattered tufts of fur. The window latch was still locked. The only way out was the door, slightly ajar, as if it had been nudged open by something small and determined. Scout! Michael barked, his voice sharp. The border collie was already outside, nose to the ground, tail rigid. He let out a single high-pitched bark and bolted toward the tree line. Michael grabbed his coat, boots crunching against the snow as he followed. The cold bit hard, 20 degrees and dropping, but he barely felt it. His breath puffed in fast clouds, legs pumping as he tore after Scout, heart hammering in panic. She wouldn't have gone far. She was just getting her strength back, still limping slightly from a sore front paw. But if she'd wandered into the wrong part of the woods, she'd be helpless against a predator, or the cold. Scout paused at the edge of the ridge trail, nose darting left and right, then barked again. Michael dropped to one knee, scanning the ground. Tiny tracks in the snow, light, uneven. Willows. He stood and moved quickly, following the trail down the hill, branches scratching his arms as he ducked through the underbrush. Every few feet, the prints faltered. At one point, they disappeared entirely beneath a set of deep, clawed indentations. Michael froze. Mountain lion. The tracks were unmistakable, large, wide-padded paws pressing deep into the snow. They overlapped Willow's. Worse, they were fresh. His stomach tightened. He scanned the slope, every nerve on edge. Scout stood still now, hackles raised, gaze fixed on the dense grove ahead. Michael stepped forward slowly, heart thundering. Willow, he called, voice breaking. A crack of movement to the left, a flash of tan fur behind the trees. He braced himself. But it wasn't the lion. It was Willow. She limped from behind a fallen log, body low, her tiny chest heaving with effort. Her fur was damp and frosted with snow. Her ears twitched weakly. Michael rushed forward, dropping to his knees as she stumbled into his arms. She didn't cry. She just collapsed against him, exhausted. He held her close, shielding her from the wind, heart pounding. She was shivering, but alive. Behind them, Scout let out a soft, relieved whine. Michael stood, cradling her close to his chest. They had to move fast. He didn't know how close the mountain lion was. But he knew it had smelled her, and would be back. And now, more than ever, he knew. She didn't belong here anymore. The fire roared to life, chasing the chill from the cabin as Michael crouched beside the sofa, gently drying Willow with a thick towel. Her fur was soaked, crusted with snow and tiny ice crystals. She didn't resist. She didn't move at all, just lay limp in his hands, her breath shallow, body trembling with cold and fear. Scout circled nearby, pacing with nervous energy, letting out a low whine every few seconds. He kept glancing toward the door, as if still guarding against whatever threat had stalked the trees. Michael wrapped Willow in the towel and held her against his chest. Her small frame radiated fragility. She'd been out there for nearly 3 hours, alone in the snow, with a predator close behind. And still, she'd made it back. She came home, Michael whispered to himself. She knew where to come. He carried her to the fireside crate and laid her gently inside. She curled weakly, head resting on her paw, eyes fluttering closed. Every now and then, her ear twitched or her side rose with a shaky breath, but otherwise, she barely stirred. Michael sat beside her for hours, feeding her warm broth with a dropper, rubbing her paws between his fingers to restore circulation. She licked the broth slowly, gaze unfocused but trusting. At one point, she tried to rise, legs wobbling beneath her, and Michael caught her gently. "No, no. Easy," he murmured, easing her back down. When she finally fell into deeper sleep, the crate now lined with fresh towels and blankets, he leaned back and exhaled. This wasn't just about survival anymore. Willow had proven she could survive. She had faced the wild, tasted its cruelty, and still found her way home, not because she belonged inside 4 walls, but because she had trusted the man inside them. Michael stood slowly, stepping outside onto the porch. The air had gone still again, snow settling quietly under moonlight. He looked toward the forest, the same forest that had taken so much from him. And now, in its own strange way, given something back. He knew what came next. She wouldn't be safe much longer here. Wild instincts would sharpen. She'd grow bigger, stronger, more unpredictable. And someone would notice. Officer Tully's deadline was approaching fast. But more than that. Willow deserved the wild. Not to be abandoned in it. But to return to it, with strength. With choice. Michael turned back toward the door, his mind made up. Tomorrow, they would begin preparing. Training. Conditioning. Helping Willow learn how to hunt, how to stay hidden, how to run free. He would give her what her mother had died trying to protect, a real chance. And when the time came, he would let her go. Not because he wanted to. But because it was right. Because love doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes, it means knowing when to open the door. The trail wound deep into the pines, coated in soft layers of snow that crunched under Michael's boots. His breath came in slow clouds, hands steady as he guided Willow along the narrow ridge path. She walked just ahead of him, pausing now and then to sniff at tree trunks or dart her eyes toward distant birdsong. It had been 4 weeks since she'd returned from that storm-soaked night. And in that time, she had transformed. Her once wobbly legs were firm, muscles lean beneath her growing coat. Her blue eyes had turned golden, sharp with instinct. She was no longer the fragile thing curled in a flannel blanket. She was a bobcat again. Michael had spent every day preparing her. He built climbing posts behind the cabin, rigged small meat lures in the trees to sharpen her reflexes. He taught her the edge of the clearing, the scent of coyote, the danger of roads. He even tracked her from a distance, letting her wander a little farther each day, always watching, always nearby. But he knew what today was. The final day. Willow paused up ahead, tail twitching. She turned to glance back at him, ears perked. Michael caught his breath. "It's okay," he said softly. "Go on." She hesitated for a beat. Then she turned and padded forward, deeper into the woods. At the base of the ridge, he had built a small shelter out of brush and logs. Inside, a bed of pine straw and a small stockpile of fresh-killed rabbit meat, one last offering. It wasn't meant to cage her, only to ease the transition. Willow approached the shelter cautiously, sniffed once, and then disappeared inside. Michael stood still, the wind tugging gently at his coat. He wanted to call her back. Just one more day. Just one more sunrise with her curled by the fire. But he didn't. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out the old scarf, the same one he'd wrapped her in when she was half frozen and motherless on the ridge. He tied it to a low-hanging branch just outside the shelter, a soft marker in the snow-covered woods. A way to remember. Not for her. For him. Scout sat nearby, quiet, his eyes on the trees. Michael gave the forest one last look. Then he turned and walked away. He didn't glance back, not because he wasn't thinking of her, but because he wanted her to move forward without hesitation. And as he reached the top of the trail, just before it curved out of sight, he heard a sound behind him. A rustle. Then silence. She had seen him go. And she hadn't followed. Michael smiled, sadness and pride mingling in his chest. She was home now. Not in the cabin. But in the wild, where she had always belonged. A week passed. The cabin felt different now. Not empty, just quieter. The kind of quiet that settles after something sacred has moved through and left its mark. Michael sat at the edge of his porch, sipping coffee from a tin mug. Scout lay nearby, head resting on his paws, ears twitching lazily with the morning breeze. The woods beyond swayed gently, the sun rising behind the peaks like a slow exhale. The crate by the fire was gone. So was the towel on the couch. Every reminder of Willow had been packed away, but none of it was truly gone. You don't forget something like that. And the town hadn't either. 3 days after Willow's release, Officer Tully had returned to check in, clipboard in hand, expecting resistance, or excuses. Instead, he found a man with mud on his boots, scratches on his arms, and calm in his eyes. "She's gone," Michael had said, simply. Tully had asked for proof. Michael showed him the camera trap footage. There she was, Willow, padding through the trees near the shelter Michael had built. Her body moved low and confident. She sniffed at the scarf, then disappeared into the woods without hesitation. "She didn't look back," Michael said. Tully nodded, more thoughtful than Michael had expected. "That's how you know you did it right." News spread through Derby faster than Michael could have stopped it. Sophie dropped by again, this time with a pie and a gentle smile. "I heard," she said. "They're talking about you like some kind of animal whisperer." Michael chuckled. "I'm just a guy with a fireplace and a soft spot." She stayed for coffee. And when she left, she didn't seem as far away as before. Later that week, a reporter from a small regional wildlife magazine reached out. Someone at the ranger station had passed the story along. They wanted to run a feature, The Bobcat and the Hermit, a story of wilderness and redemption. Michael declined the interview but sent a photo, a quiet shot of Willow sleeping beside Scout, firelight dancing across the room. He didn't need a headline. The story had already changed the only person it needed to. Now, in the still mornings and the snow-lit evenings, he watched the woods a little differently. Every snap of a branch or flutter of birdsong brought a flicker of hope. And sometimes, just before dusk, he thought he saw her, just a shape in the trees, golden fur between the shadows. Never close. Never long. But there. Alive. And that was enough. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled once more, warming the same walls that had once echoed with silence. Michael stood, finished his coffee, and stepped back inside. Winter was far from over. But now, the cold didn't feel so heavy. Because somewhere out there, a little bobcat named Willow was learning to live free. And so was he. Sometimes, healing doesn't come through words, it comes through action, through care, and through the quiet courage to let go. Michael didn't rescue Willow to keep her. He rescued her to give her a second chance at what she was meant to be. In doing so, he found his own path back to life. In our own lives, we all carry pain, loss, or silence. But like Willow, we sometimes just need someone to believe in us long enough to get back on our feet, and then trust us to run. Thank you for walking this journey with us here on Paw Prints and Stories. If this story moved you, imagine what kindness might still be hiding in the wild corners of your own heart. So here's your challenge, this week: who can you help set free? Not to keep, but to truly let go. Think about it, and leave your paw print where it matters most.